All right, so we have a lot to discuss about the Archon Quest and a lot of theories also to theorize and discuss as well. And I know people would have probably expected me to start making videos about Renova and Celestia and the Fatui Harbingers and Project Mistleton or the Saritsa and her future plans as well. But I didn't want to do those videos first. I actually wanted to do this video first because it's, of course, talking about the best guide in all of Teyvat, Paimon, our closest compatriot, and quite literally the one that we're probably going to have to defend in the near future. Paimon has been a mystery since the very beginning of the game, with theories coming up left, right, and center about her roots and the role that she could play potentially in the future. It was a complete mystery. Like I would say, you have a clue board when you're doing a detective work or something along those lines. It was completely empty, right, when it came to Paimon. But thanks to the Archon Quest in Snezhnaya, we have gleaned some more details that confirm Paimon's connection to Celestia and even her link to the likes of Piero, which was actually not even expected previously. So now we have a couple of things that we can put up on that clue board that I mentioned, right? We finally have these answers about Paimon, but in my opinion, these answers may have actually made her more suspicious or more questionable than clearer previously, right? And honestly, that's what makes this so interesting. Yes, we finally know a little bit more about where Paimon came from, and I know a lot of people will say, well, it's given us more questions than what we had previously, but in my opinion, at least now we can progress forward, right? We're progressing forward with Paimon's character. We have stuff on the board, and now we can come up with some new stuff, new ideas, and new theories regarding this character that's so closely attached to us. And if you guys enjoy content such as this, where we go over theories, and you want to see more content on Genshin, such as lore breakdowns, building characters, streams, and much more, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and follow as well, as it will help me out in the algorithm massively, while also letting you guys enjoy and see my content in your recommended sections. So it'll be a massive appreciation from yours truly if you do so. Now, to just quickly TLDR exactly what we have learned before we get into the theories and discussion, effectively we've learned two major points, right? Paimon is indeed from Celestia, and Piero had summoned her sometime before the cataclysm from Celestia using technology that is very similar to what was utilized to bring the moon down in Nordcry. Furthermore, we also have information based on what Renova said, at least, that Paimon has no power nor any authority from Celestia, and Piero seems to concur, at least the iteration of Paimon that's on Teyvat. However, there's a couple of things that are already quite glaring to me, and even Hoyo hinted it a little bit towards the end with what Piero said. First and foremost, I don't think we should necessarily believe and assume what Renova is saying is true. She could very well be lying for her own gain, and even though she may seem to be answering everyone's questions all happily, especially with her ego and hubris, as we saw in the theater sequence, right? Especially when it came to links to the heavenly principles in Celestia, I think she'd be a little bit more hesitant to do so, right? I just don't see it happening that she'd be so open about discussions regarding what's happening in Celestia right now, considering the state of it all, right? With Asmodee missing and just generally the heavenly principles sleeping. I don't think she'd want to take a risk by telling the truth about something that could be something more than what she wants us to believe is the case, right? There is a very good chance that whatever Paimon is may be a threat or a concern to Celestia, and since Paimon is, like I said, currently so unassuming, keeping the likes of the Traveler, who's obviously a descender and can influence fate quite heavily on Teyvat, unaware would be a perfect solution. Piero even stated that he does not actually know what Paimon's status was when she was in Celestia, and all he knows is that she was basically like a newborn infant when she had dropped to Conrea, which makes me believe that there is at least something there, there's something more there. And my initial assumption and guesses are that Renova is lying or is unaware of the reason why Paimon was created in the first place, and that Hoyo is leaving it up in the air clearly with all the lines from Piero regarding Paimon, and even our dialogue at the end was a little bit suspicious, right? When Paimon was trying to talk to the Traveler, saying like, I might be from Celestia, but I'm not like them or anything of that sort. And we replied, one of the replies was that as long as Paimon is in the HP, it's all good. I think there is a little bit of a hint in that sentence. You wouldn't really just added there for no reason whatsoever, right? In my opinion, I think there is something there. Now, before I actually get into the theories that I believe have some legs, we should talk about the two theories that we had kind of set up actually before the Snezhnaya Archon Quest. I had put it in my predictions actually, and the two predictions were that Paimon is connected to either Asmodee or Istroth. I just don't see either one being possible anymore, simply because I feel like Renova would kicked up a more of a fuss, especially in the regards to if it was a segment or a connection to Asmodee, right? And also just generally, I don't see the timeline of how Paimon came to be in Teyvat linking up and matching up with the events, especially in regards to Asmodee, right? My original personal theory when it came to Asmodee was that the sibling requested that she leave a segment to trail and guide the traveler along their journey. And with the memory loss and the fact that Paimon existed pre-Cataclysm and Abyss sibling shenanigans, I believe that theory holds a lot less water. And Istroth was a similar idea as well, you know, observing what is happening on Teyvat and obviously following the traveler, because the traveler is the only one that can kind of cloak, you know, a segment like that, in my opinion, right? A bit more likelier than Asmodee, but I still don't see it as feasible anymore either. But I did have one more theory in those predictions about Paimon that I still think fits the bill. And while the way I have it actually happening and panning out may seem outlandish, I could see alternative routes on how it may have happened as well, depending on how Hoyo sets up future events, right? The theory: Paimon being the Heavenly Principles' segment, more specifically the segment on emotion. I know, with the Moongazer quest, the whole thing with the spaceship AI being the Heavenly Principles is a tad bit unlikely, I should say, due to the timing of the events. However, I still believe there is a small possibility it could still be a thing. But even without that being a factor, the Heavenly Principles very well could have segmented and removed its emotional aspects to only leave logic and reason to ensure that whatever decisions it made did not have any feelings towards it at all, and all it would do would be for the sole purpose of the betterment and purity of Teyvat and the new civilizations. This would make more logical sense due to the sudden changes and more evident moves the Heavenly Principles would make in punishments and executions of various civilizations. That segment that was separated would be locked/hidden away and not allowed to fester or grow until Piero summoned it from Celestia, hence Paimon being basically a newborn infant, as it had feelings and emotions but no knowledge, no reason, and no logic to back it up. The only outlandish and questionable thing I have is if it was locked up or if it was hidden away, how could have Piero brought her down, right? We know that Piero used Conrayan technology, and we know obviously with the stuff that Rhine-Daughter was doing, the fact that they were able to summon the Traveler's sibling, it was used to bring a whole ass Frost Moon down, of course, in Nordcry, basically, right? The basis of that technology was from the same Conrayan technology that Piero used all those years ago, those centuries ago. And I believe personally, if they were to say that it was that powerful enough to bring something down from Celestia that was hidden away, I could believe it. And especially if you had framed it in a way where effectively the Heavenly Principles completely forgot about it, right? When you segregate something that you do not need anymore and you forget about it entirely, it's very possible that they could have just left it to the side and it was just hidden away in a corner and nobody knew about it until obviously this happened, right? I think it would be very interesting if that was the case, because especially, you know, it would also make a lot more sense for Renova to also lie about it, purely because she would have been obviously internally very surprised about its existence and the fact that Paimon even exists in such a form, and especially having such a link to the Heavenly Principles as well, who's obviously sleeping and unaware of everything that's going on currently at this moment in time. For me, this theory is definitely more on the outlandish side still, even now, and while I do think that they would need to do a lot to make this theory work, I still believe it is entirely possible, especially with a topic that I'm actually going to be discussing later on in this video, because I feel like there's certain things about Paimon that none of us have recognized except for a certain lore YouTuber, and I want to reference him to talk about his theory and how it could actually work with this very theory that I've made regarding Paimon being a segment. Alright, let's move on to the second theory now, and it's one that I think most people will probably agree with, and I've seen it be mentioned here and there, so it's not a real revelation on what the end point of this theory is. However, I think I have some brand new stuff to bring to the table in terms of how it's going to be executed. Now, if somebody has already said it, well, tough shit. I didn't know it was mentioned. I only know of a couple of communities that I follow and a couple of videos that I check out. So if somebody beyond my circle has said it, well, I didn't know, alright? It is what it is. Anyway, the theory is that Paimon could be the precursor or was the shade of reason. That's the theory. Now, there's been a bit of divisive comments regarding this theory, right? Reason has always been associated with the circlet outfit, first and foremost. And while Renova was discussing Paimon's lack of power and authority, there was a suspiciously long focus on Paimon's circlet rather than her entire body, which has led people to believe that Paimon could potentially be associated with reason in some way. That's what even I thought. When we first saw it in the Archon Quest, I was like, well, there's a suspiciously long pause on her circlet for some reason while she's talking. Well, the problem with that is, and this is what a lot of people are arguing against and playing the devil's advocate, you could say, to this theory, is that for the longest, Istaroth was associated with sands, Renova with the feather, Naberius/Rhine-Daughter with flower, and Asmodee with the goblet, with the circlet of logos being related to the heavenly principles, being the ruler of reason. So how would and why would Paimon all of a sudden be a new figure thrown into the mix for such a position? Well, while we always believed that the artifacts were aligned to the four shades and the heavenly principles, it was never really fully confirmed by Hoyo themselves, and they left the interpretation open regarding this link, and as such, many, including myself, can also see them changing it up and pushing Paimon to be a candidate for the Shade of Reason. I believe that this could have been the case, especially as obviously the heavenly principles, while dealing with the cataclysm and what Kanrea was doing and all the events that had happened in Teyvat previously as well, they could have very well been working on creating and preparing a new Shade of Reason so that they would be able to act instead of the heavenly principles, as they would simply remain as the overarching observer, or while they rest, especially after working on holding off the abyss and stopping the disaster, right? Obviously, they did not expect Kanrea to obviously summon something from Celestia, and Asmodee then defecting as well following the events of the Cataclysm. There could be something there in this theory, especially because I believe it shows, there is this loss of control or lack of control from the heavenly principles. It has a couple of holes, I will admit, but I do think it's very possible, as clearly there is a limit to the gods, as Piero has suggested many a times in marketing material leading up to Snezhnaya, right? And even Nordcry for that matter. Another theory that I actually have linking to the heavenly principles and Paimon the Shade of Reason, and I think is one that could work much better in my opinion, and it's more unique in a way, to be honest, right? Is that it's not impossible that Paimon could have been created and was being prepared to be utilized as the future body for the heavenly principles. Remember, the heavenly principles is tired, exhausted, is completely knocked out right now, is sleeping, unconscious, right? Remember, if you have watched Marvel content, I will admit that this might be a little bit niche in some cases. I say Marvel is niche as if it's not like the biggest film franchise ever, but if you have watched Marvel movies and if you watched Avengers Age of Ultron, think of when Ultron had utilized the Vibranium and other resources, including the Mind Stone, to make Vision. And if you don't know much Marvel stuff, then I'll try and use some Genshin content here as well, because I think this might actually be a little bit of foreshadowing from Hoyo, If you've played through the most recent World Quest, right? The long series of World Quests related to the Eye of Grey, right? What if, similar to what we saw there with the Eye of Grey taking over the body of the bellied Tsar, we know Hoyo loves to foreshadow stuff in world quests and, major events and stuff like that. What if, similar to that, the Heavenly Principles was planning on using the body of Paimon fully built and grown to implant their own consciousness into that body? I think that this could be one theory that actually could happen, because why else would Paimon have no power or authority on Celestia? The real question that I would have following all of this would be, how did Paimon gain sentience, if she was only meant to be the body for the HP to take over, right? In my opinion, either something would have occurred during Piero's summon situation, right? Or in the years in between the Cataclysm and Paimon meeting the Traveler, something brand new developed within Paimon that we do not know yet, considering she has almost no memories outside of some minor familiarity about what happened before meeting the Traveler, right? I think this could work. It could be very interesting. I think this whole potentially being prepared to be the new body of the Heavenly Principles, or, utilizing a segment to basically kind of be able to implant the consciousness of the Heavenly Principles into, I think it might be the case. I really do think that could be the case. I feel like we've seen it happen once or twice. I mean, the most recent time has literally been with the Eye of Grey and the Belit Tsar, right? It is not improbable anymore. I don't think it's improbable anymore, and I do think there is a very good reason as to why they show us that whole world quest in such a way, right? I think there has to be a reason for that, and I do believe that this could very well fit into that. Now, there's one thing I didn't mention yet that I actually want to talk about a little bit in regards to Paimon and her living with Piero in Khaenri'ah, and how there was one more person living with Piero as well, and since we've seen them, they have not even remembered Paimon once, nor have they recognized her in any way, shape, or form. No, I'm not talking about Dainsleif if you thought that. I'm actually talking about the Abyss sibling. They actually lived with Piero for a period of time, and if the higher-ups of Khaenri'ah were continuously summoning for beings like Paimon and the sibling, surely they would have been summoned at the same time, or not necessarily the same time, but a very similar time nonetheless. So why hasn't Paimon been recognized by the Abyss sibling? Well, two theories to that I have. The first one is one that I actually have to acknowledge and credit the cat with blue hat for, and this links back to what I said earlier about Paimon potentially being a segment of the Heavenly Principles. More specifically, I said that they were a segment of emotion from the Heavenly Principles, but according to cat with blue hat, Paimon might be a segment of the Ruler of Reason section, so more on the reason side of things. Now, for me personally, I would be very surprised if they were to let go of that so easily and in such a manner right before the events of the Cataclysm. But what they suggest is that Paimon was basically built using similar technology to the Lunar Veil tech, basically making her unviewable in a way, uninteresting, especially to those that are threatened or threatening her. And especially more so if those who view Paimon lack reason, for Paimon is a fragment of the Heavenly Principle, specifically the Rule of Reason segment. Now, of course, this theory actually, like I said, falls in line with what I said earlier on, and it's in a different way and a different segment entirely, but I do think it's quite interesting nonetheless, and I'll actually leave a link to Cat with Blue Hat's video in the description down below, so you guys can go and check and see their theory in its entirety. But I do think it's a fairly plausible theory, and the evidence does suggest, that there is some possibility about Paimon being an unviewable and uninteresting character to certain individuals. Obviously, we've seen, the likes of Albedo be able to do a drawing of her, and obviously people are able to still recognize her, but there are times where you could say that people are just unobservant regarding her. Like, even when Renova actually was talking about Paimon, she was continuously referring to Paimon as it. So obviously there is a case where there might be a situation where she doesn't either recognize Paimon as a being in itself, or there's something more there. So that's theory number one regarding the Abyss sibling. My other theory regarding the Abyss sibling is actually more to do with the Abyss sibling themselves, and that's simply that the Abyss sibling is an entity that's not the same as the sibling that was there before the events of the Cataclysm, or more specifically, when they came to find us in the spaceship. Now, we still have a lot of questions regarding how the sibling was summoned to Khaenri'ah, especially when the spaceship was not open. And while it could be a case of teleportation, I feel like there's a lot more to the story of the sibling that we still do not know yet, right? Obviously, that's the case, right? Especially when it comes to the body and consciousness of the sibling, with so many experimentations and endeavors in Khaenri'ah that clearly involved the Abyss and forbidden knowledge, that it has affected the sibling in such a way that they simply have pretty much no recollection of us, the traveler, at a point, right? That's why only after the events of the Cataclysm were underway and certain things were being pushed in the siblings' direction to remind them that they have a traveler sibling still alive and somewhere hidden away, right? So clearly there's something that must have happened there, to the point where they also don't actually remember anything to do with Paimon, especially because Paimon was being kept away by Piero, and just hidden away, more or less, basically, right? Not really hidden away, but kept in a corner, just letting her do her own thing, what newborn infants do, basically. And with that, I wrap up these theories and leave with a few words. Genshin is cooking, and honestly, I think this is where things get interesting. We know Paimon came from Celestia, we know Piero summoned her, we know she was basically a newborn when she arrived in Khaenri'ah, and we know that wherever she was supposed to be, she apparently has no power or authority of her own currently. But we still don't know why she existed in the first place. Why did the Heavenly Principles create her in the first place? And I think that's the biggest question we should be asking now. The question is what exactly was Paimon created to do? Why was Piero, the one who brought her to Teyvat in the first place, able to do so freely? And personally, I think these are the questions we're going to find out during the events of Snezhnaya.